So how do you know when it's right to stand up to evil and when it's not? Stay tuned for this brief Bible study to learn the answer. Hi, this is Pastor Mark Pierce of Church Requel, and we're here for Bible study number 122 on this Tuesday, May the 4th. Today I am standing in front of the carousel in downtown Mansfield, Richland Carousel Park. It is one of the real highlights of living downtown Mansfield. I've had the privilege of seeing most of my children and now my grandchildren riding the horses that are made right here in Mansfield and carved right out of wood. It's really an outstanding little feature that we have here in Mansfield. Well, today we want to move on in our study, so let's take a look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 39. The very first half of the verse is as far as we're going to get today, and it reads this way: "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil." Now, here, this is Jesus speaking again, and we know that he's talking about, we know the principle, I should say, that he's talking about, because he gives us four individual examples that we're going to take one at a time as we work our way through this passage. But he tells us on these examples that we are to personally respond and handle evil in the right way. He gives us these examples, for example, of when we are insulted and we've had our dignity injured, when someone slaps us on the right cheek. He tells us, second of all, how we are to handle legal action when it's threatened, when our security is threatened, when we're wrong, when someone has sued us. He tells us, thirdly, what to do when our liberty is threatened, when the political powers that be or the military powers that be unfairly impress us into service and compel us to do what we would not otherwise do. And then fourthly, he tells us what to do when our property is threatened, what to do when we are unfairly taken advantage of in terms of both loans and gifts. Again, we're going to take a look at each one of these one day at a time. But we should be careful before we get too far in this teaching not to press Jesus' teaching here about resisting evil too far, because the Bible is clear that we should indeed resist evil in the appropriate ways. For example, and I'll just give you 6 quick examples here of how the Bible also talks to us about resisting evil. Jesus resisted evil when he drove out the money changers. We see that recorded in all 4 Gospels. Paul resisted evil when he stood up to Peter, who was siding with the Judaizers in Galatians chapter 2, verse 11. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Bible across the board says to remove wicked people from ourselves. We see that in the New Testament, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 13, and then also in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 5. Jesus tells us how to deal with evil in the congregation and what the right principle is for restoring relationships in a manner of love. First going one at a time, and then with someone else, and then with the elders, and then finally removing someone from the congregation. We see that in Matthew chapter 18. Then Paul tells us that those who continue to sin should be rebuked before all, in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 20. We're told about the government in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 14, that the governors are sent by him, by God, for the punishment of evildoers. So when we see Jesus teaching as regards to resisting evil in the Sermon on the Mount, we should not look at it in isolation from what the rest of the Bible tells us. We are in the appropriate, correct ways to resist evil. And we do that in the church, we do that through the government, but there also are going to be times where we individually, personally, come across evil in our life. And Jesus here in the Sermon on the Mount is telling us how we should respond by not retaliating. He tells us that we should not retaliate. This is not a matter of just seeking vengeance, but finding security in God when we are personally insulted, whether it be a slap in the face or insulting words. How do we manage our response to insults? Secondly, Jesus is teaching us what we do if someone is threatening to sue us unfairly or rightly. How do we respond to that? If the military forces us to comply with them, how do we respond personally and individually? And then if someone attempts to borrow from us in an unfavorable way, how do we personally, individually respond to that? You see, what Jesus is teaching us here in the Sermon on the Mount in these verses that we're going to be considering for the rest of this week is the exact opposite of what our natural desires would be. We would naturally escalate the wrong that would be done us by doing an even greater wrong to someone else. Our natural response is, I want you to feel exactly the same way, if not worse, than how you have made me feel. You see, by ourselves, without God in our lives, this is really the only response that we have. But when we are secure in God's love, when we are secure in God's mercy and His forgiveness, when we experience God's grace to us, we have an extraordinary, we might say an even supernatural ability to respond in exactly the opposite way than what our natural inclinations would lead us to escalate upwards in good deeds toward God rather than downward in evil towards evil. We resist evil by not giving into evil ourselves. Tomorrow, on May the 6th, we're going to talk about how to respond with dignity when we are insulted. In other words, how do we turn the other cheek? Thanks for joining me today. This has been Pastor Mark with Church Requel, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon tomorrow.